Imagine two substances sitting side by side in society. One is responsible for millions of deaths worldwide, fuels violence, addiction, and disease, and tears families apart. Yet it's toasted at weddings, advertised during major sporting events, and sold on nearly every street corner. The other can be less addictive, less lethal, and in some cases medically beneficial, but possessing it can cost someone their freedom. If laws were based purely on logic or harm, this situation wouldn't exist. So instead of asking which drug is worse, a better question emerges. How did one substance quietly earn a permanent pass while so many others were condemned? At first glance, most people assume the answer must be science. Surely alcohol is legal because experts proved it was safer than everything else. But here's where the story becomes unsettling. When modern drug laws were first being shaped, alcohol wasn't subjected to the same scrutiny as other substances at all. It wasn't debated, weighed, or compared in the way people imagine today. It simply stood apart from the conversation, almost invisible. While lawmakers argued over what to restrict, one drug slipped through the cracks. Not because it was harmless, but because questioning it felt unnatural. Understanding why requires going further back than modern laws, into moments where culture, fear, and power quietly took the driver's seat. To see how this imbalance formed, we need to step into a world before the word drug even meant what it does today. For thousands of years, humans fermented grains, fruits, and honey. Alcohol wasn't viewed as a dangerous substance. It was food, medicine, ritual, and survival tool. In many ancient cities, beer and wine were safer to drink than water contaminated by disease. Alcohol appeared in religious ceremonies, sealed political alliances, and marked social milestones. By the time societies began worrying about regulation, alcohol wasn't experienced as a drug at all. It was infrastructure, but that alone doesn't explain why it survived when others didn't. The real tension begins in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, when governments started trying to control substances for the first time. Industrialization had reshaped cities, immigration was changing demographics, and public anxiety was rising. Substances like opium, cocaine, and cannabis became associated, often unfairly, with marginalized groups, foreign cultures, or social unrest. Alcohol, meanwhile, remained universal. It belonged to everyone. And when fear drives lawmaking, universality becomes protection. Then came one of the most dramatic experiments in legal history: Prohibition. In 1920, the United States outlawed alcohol nationwide. Supporters believed they were striking at the root of crime, poverty, and moral decay. At first, it felt like a moral victory. But reality unfolded very differently. Illegal alcohol flooded the streets. Organized crime syndicates exploded in power. Violence increased. Police corruption spread. Ordinary citizens became criminals overnight. Alcohol didn't vanish. It simply slipped beyond control. The true story of Prohibition's collapse is crucial because it permanently changed how governments think. When the ban was repealed in 1933, the lesson absorbed wasn't that alcohol was safe. It was that banning a deeply ingrained substance could destabilize society itself. That realization would echo quietly through every drug policy that followed, even if no one said it out loud. Here's where anticipation turns into imbalance. While alcohol was slowly rehabilitated and regulated, other substances were being locked into the opposite trajectory. Cannabis is one of the clearest examples. In the 1800s, it was sold legally in pharmacies and used in medical treatments. Its criminalization didn't begin with evidence of mass harm. It began with propaganda. Newspapers linked it to crime, violence, and racial fear. Political figures amplified these stories. Science took a back seat, and fear took the microphone. This pattern repeated again and again. Substances associated with groups already viewed as outsiders were framed as threats. Alcohol never fit that narrative. It was too familiar, too domestic, too embedded. And by the time governments were ready to draw hard legal lines, alcohol stood on the wrong side of history to be challenged, and the right side of power to be protected. Another force quietly locking alcohol into legality was money. By the time serious drug laws existed, alcohol had become an economic engine. Governments didn't just tolerate it, they depended on it. Taxes on alcohol funded public services. Entire industries revolved around its production and sale. Banning it again would have meant tearing out a pillar of the economy. Other drugs never had that chance. They were criminalized before they could become taxable, regulated, or normalized. There's a controversial theory that ties all of this together. Drug laws aren't primarily about safety. They're about social control. Substances used by dominant groups are regulated. Substances linked to marginalized or disruptive groups are criminalized. Alcohol belonged to politicians, business owners, and voters. Psychedelics became associated with counterculture. Opium was linked to immigrants. Cocaine to racial panic. The science mattered far less than who was using what. What makes this uncomfortable is what modern research reveals. When scientists measure overall harm, factoring addiction, health damage, and social consequences, alcohol consistently ranks among the most dangerous drugs. In several peer-reviewed studies, it scores higher than heroin or cocaine in total societal harm. Yet legality never adjusted. Once a substance is normalized, evidence struggles to compete with tradition. There's also the issue of predictability. Alcohol's effects are familiar. People believe they understand it. Governments prefer substances they think they can manage, even if the management is imperfect. Newer or stigmatized drugs feel unpredictable, which makes prohibition politically attractive. Fear thrives where understanding is thin. Over time, these choices hardened into law, and the laws hardened into common sense. Entire generations grew up believing alcohol was normal and other drugs were inherently evil, without ever being told how uneven that judgment really was. Even now, as psychedelics re-enter medical research and cannabis becomes legal in many places, alcohol's privileged status remains largely unquestioned. So why is alcohol legal while many other drugs aren't? Not because it's safer, not because it's less addictive, and not because science demanded it. Alcohol is legal because it survived history before rules existed, weathered a failed ban, aligned with economic power, and became too familiar to confront. Other drugs never had that head start. The unsettling takeaway is this: drug laws don't reflect reality as much as they reflect legacy. They tell a story about fear, politics, and timing, not chemistry. And once you see that, the question changes. It's no longer, why is alcohol legal? It becomes, what else do we accept? Not because it makes sense, but because it's always been there. That question doesn't just challenge drug policy. It challenges how societies decide what's normal, what's dangerous, and who gets to make that call.